Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. This episode is brought to you by The Wellness Paradigm, a holistic health coaching company shifting the way that women understand and heal their bodies. Through bioenergetic testing, functional lab testing, and functional nutrition, we uncover what traditional approaches often overlook so you can stop guessing, start healing, and finally feel like yourself again. No more one-size-fits-all approach, just real answers, deep-rooted healing, and the clarity and confidence you deserve to feel incredible. It's time to shift the paradigm for women's health. Now on to our show. Hello, Shanae. Welcome to the
Hello.
show. We have a really cool conversation going down here with Shanae. She is an astrologer and a conscious living strategist who helps people reconnect with their values and help them figure out how to interact in this world more authentically. And I think, when we were talking about different topics, there's so many things that we could talk about, but she's really going to tie into how astrology can help you feel more control in your life and explore different avenues of astrology and how different timings and seasons help you feel a little bit less behind, right? And just more in sync with everything going on. So I'm going to give the floor to you. I would love to know a little bit about yourself, why astrology, and kind of how it's shifted, your life and people around you.
Sure. My story with astrology was when I was about 18, I Googled why anybody would believe in astrology because I really thought that only an idiot would believe in it because I didn't know anything about it. And it turns out it's very nuanced and has a lot of different things that it can provide you. And there's definitely some podcast out there going through all the different branches of astrology. So I certainly can't spend a lot of time on that. But what I have found over some processes of, investigating things, taking some courses, I found what I really enjoyed was trying to figure out what is truly me as an individual and not what I've taken on from everybody else. And that is kind of what I like to focus on, like you were saying, living authentically, which can mean a lot of different things, but to me means living in, I don't want to abuse the word living in alignment because I think it's very overused. But I can't actually think of a better usage for that word than seeing this it's not even three-dimensional, it's a two-dimensional map of where the planets were when you were born. And it doesn't have to mean something. But as you investigate it, you see that it actually does mean something. And so I gave myself a little bit of, I turned my skepticism into curiosity, and it did really change my life. So ever since 2021, there was quite a good break when I wasn't studying astrology at all. But since 2021, I've been studying it very seriously. And the transformation between how I approach my life and the circumstances that come at me has completely changed. And I think that the best aspect of it is, like you're saying, is that feeling of I'm not necessarily controlling the circumstances, but I feel in control of me now and my reactions to things. And that was not possible before. And so I'm not saying this is a magic silver bullet, but it will help explain a lot of things that are confusing if you are open to it. So,
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. It's funny you open this up with your skepticism because I think a lot
it
of people,
was.
are turned off by it as like, oh, that's just a load of bull crap, and
Yeah.
I've seen really very cool things kind of line up. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about like what, not necessarily what got you into it, but why the shift and what have you seen benefits for yourself or for clients as far as when you got more into like this astrology niche, for lack of better terms.
Sure. I think for me, it was a lot of at the time that I've really got super deep into it and it really became kind of a pillar in my life. And certainly my spirituality. I don't know that it doesn't have to be a spiritual journey for every single person, but for me it was. And it started with a lot of self-loathing. And I actually it was weird because I grew up, I'm 33, so I was born in 91. I think my generation has that we can do anything and be anybody if we just do the hard work. And so we were
Yes.
told that. And so I really never questioned whether or not I could do something incredible. So I was brainwashed basically by my teachers and parents and authority figures that I could do amazing things. So I never had this suicidal nature to myself, but I had this weird desire to just completely start my life over, to have a new identity, to move away, to not tell anybody. Like, it was a really weird thing to hate yourself so much, but also feel like you had a lot of potential. And so I was having a really hard time figuring out how those things went together. And then eventually, one day, I was at a Christmas party with my friends, and suddenly it dawned on me why I was having such a hard time synthesizing who I was, because I had a lot of people who would abandon me. My dad abandoned me. My friends, I had a friend group after friend group that would abandon me. And many men that I was interested in that decided I wasn't the one or whatever. And it felt like one after another. And I was like, why is this happening to me over and over? What's wrong with me? And suddenly I realized I'm actually a very layered person. And I realized this through astrology. Now, for anybody who is completely unaware and has no idea whatsoever, astrology is not only about personality. And I want to preface that, because if you feel really confident with yourself, you might be tricked into thinking that astrology doesn't have anything else to offer you. Nay, there is a lot to offer you. So please hang tight. But for me, it was definitely understanding the way I communicate with people is different than who I am at the core level. And it's very different than who I am when you first meet me. And it's also very different from where I find security from. And so once I understood those different layers, I started to see how I could love myself again, instead of just acting as if I was a whole nother person, because people kept leaving me. So obviously I was the problem. I was the common denominator. Well, luckily, that is not the problem. The problem after a while was actually that those people were not meant for me. Well, I know that now. It's easy to look back and see that now. In the moment, though, I needed something to show me this diverse nature of what it is to be a human being, and astrology gave that to me. So that was the shift for me. And I think, just to make sure that I don't stray too far from the topic, of feeling more in control, I never felt more in control but then before, than that moment. Because even though I didn't have, I was there with friends, I'm not saying I didn't have any friends. I'm just saying I had felt like those people didn't know the real me. And I realized going forward that that was my problem, my fault. I did that to my friend group now. And so I felt so empowered after that to be able to know that it might lose some more friends, because I had to start acting as if I was, I had to start acting as my true self. And the people who were actually interested in that would be magnetized, but I had to have faith in that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard one when you are trying to step more authentically into who you are and seeing things fall apart. That could be a little scary, because you want to grip control of things not falling apart, things going the way you thought they planned, but a lot of times things fall apart to come back better,
Yeah. Yeah. You can't have a best friend that's totally soulfully aligned with you if you have a best friend who is soulfully aligned with a fake version of you.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Let's back it up a hot second, because if somebody's listening to this podcast, they might have no idea what astrology even is.
it's
Can you
true.
talk about what the hell astrology even is for somebody that is, brand new? And then if somebody wanted to get more into astrology, what would that look like?
Sure. So astrology is it's very ancient, actually. It is very varied as well. There are lots of different branches. The one I focus on is more co-creating with the energy. And if I had to sum it up in just a few words, I would say astrology is the study of the quality of time. So without giving you a physics lesson, because I don't know physics anyway, without giving you a big, long science lesson, we'll say you can see a drawing of a car, and you can see that it's got the outline of the hood and the tires and whatever. You can touch the paper, but you can't hold the car, right? That's 2D. Then you have 3D, which is an actual car. There is a shocking amount more information in a real car, right? You've got the motor, you've got the interior, and you've got the electronics. Shocking amount of more information. Now, if we that's 3D, sorry. If we apply that idea to the 4D, which is time, then how much more information is there in the 4D? So now instead of it just being the internal components of a car, it's actually the experience of the car. So it's you sitting in the car, turning on your favorite tunes, driving down a sunset highway, going out to, have a fun night with your high school boyfriend, right? It's magic and it's this. It's also flat tires and, running over a nail and you have to repair it. And so you can see how it's the quality of time. Not all of the time that you spend in your car is bad, and not all of the time that you spend in your car is a magical sunset drive in the country with your favorite song on either. So that's actually what astrology measures. So now when we use that as, individuals, there's two ways that I think even a beginner can kind of wrap their heads around. The first way is when you are looking at your birth chart, you're oftentimes confronting your personality. And that's what I was talking about before. That was my gateway, we'll say. And so you can see kind of a baseline energy of what you are like as an individual. Now, the other way that I really try to focus on with my clients that I've had for a little while when I'm trying to help them strategically live consciously, more like a verb, less like a noun, right? Them as individuals is important because if they don't love themselves and trust themselves, we can't really build a life for them that is fulfilling. So we have to do that other part first. But the second part is the process unfolding. And so that is the second piece that I think is way more interesting and way more fun. And when we get to actually play with the study of time and the quality of time. So that's what astrology is, kind of boiled down. And if somebody wanted to kind of get into astrology at a usefulness level, but not becoming an expert level, I always recommend to them that they start journaling. And I'm not joking, and you need to do it regularly. You certainly don't need to do it every day, although that is nice if you have the diligence and capacity to do that. I would say if you can just make a little note of anything that happened, even if it doesn't seem that big, maybe somebody called you out of the blue, and even though you didn't really talk about anything that important, you still write it down, that kind of thing. Because time works in a spiral. It's not a circle. It doesn't repeat, it rhymes. Okay. And so when you start journaling, you'll start to be able to see patterns and things. Now, unfortunately, those patterns will remain a mystery if you don't go any further. Only journaling does not make you an astrologer, of course. And so the best thing to do after that is to go. I'm going to give you, Shannon, I'm going to give you a link that people can go to start this process in a very beginner-friendly way. Nice. I recommend astro.com. They have this incredible tool where you can just click into a menu, click this thing. It'll pull up your birth chart. Now, you do have to know your time of birth for this to be most accurate. If the person who's listening to this is interested in doing this but doesn't know their birth time, I'm happy to do a natal chart tour for them. And I'll even do that for free. If they tell me they came from Wellness Paradigm, I will do that for them for free if they do not know their birth chart time, only because this recommendation is not very helpful to them, I don't think, because I'm not sure that they'll be able to get quite as much out of it. But I'll do that for those folks. Now, me giving you a natal chart tour for free is not worth you not knowing your birth time. So if you can get it, you get it. It is so much more priceless than me giving you a small offer for free. So I just want to make that clear.
Awesome.
After you go there, you'll be able to just literally click on the little symbols and you'll get countless pieces of information that you can read. And you do not have to have anything other than the curiosity to figure, literally clicking into menus. It is incredible. It is free and it is highly recommended by me.
I love that. So, if somebody, it's very interesting to get into astrology. And I know for you, you've kind of honed into helping people understand astrology in the lens of ways to overcome burnout and, become more aligned with their body and, just feel better. Like, tell me how that really works.
Sure. Great question. So there's two kind of ways. The first way, I'm going to resist the urge to go on a really long tangent about this. The first way is kind of that baseline energy level that we talked about. So I would say the two most important planets for this are Mars, which represents action and drive. It also represents other things like, primal activities like sex or conflict and things like that. But since we're focusing so much on feeling in control of your life and things like that, we'll focus mostly on taking action, right? Because that's what you really have control over is your actions. The other thing is the sun. The sun gets a bad rap because a lot of people think, oh, well, what does it matter if I was born in the second half of April or whatever? That's a lot of people were born then. Well, true. That's a fair criticism of pop astrology. But the sun itself represents life force energy. So if you imagine yourself as a car and you need gas, right? You need fuel. But you don't just need any fuel. If you are running on gas, then you can go X amount of distance, and that makes sense to us. But if we put diesel fuel into a gasoline engine, it doesn't go anywhere. And so that can kind of be what the sun is like. So if the sun is requiring that you're participating in this certain thing, if you're a Taurus, maybe you need to have something you need to feel comfortable. And that's not a silly thing. That is a very serious thing for Taurus. Maybe you are somebody who's a Gemini. You need to have something that keeps you intellectually stimulated. And that does not make you shallow. And so each different sun sign has this certain environment that it's happiest in. And if you're not participating with that, or if you're trivializing it, maybe you have Capricorn placements that want you to climb, and do the hard work, but you also have a Taurus sun. Well, you need to balance the two, because if you don't have any life force energy, you're not going to be going anywhere. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to feel burnt out because you're not putting the right fuel in your car. So that's the two things I think, two planets specifically, that I think are most important for energetic and having the energy to actually live your life in a sustainable and meaningful way. The second thing is where Mars is. If you are somebody who has Mars in a certain placement, you might have a lot of energy for a certain type of thing, but not enough energy for something you think you should have energy for. Mm-hmm. Here's an example. Let's say that you have Mars in Cancer. That's what I have. Mars in Cancer doesn't really have a lot of energy for things that don't really feel that meaningful. So if I should do this thing, I'm probably not going to do it. I hate to say that. But if I feel emotionally connected and I understand the emotional ramifications for something, I'm doing it early. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now if I'm a Cancer Mars and I have emotional intensity, but I don't have more arbitrary rule-based capacity for productivity, then I might look at somebody who has the opposite, and they've got Capricorn Mars. They have we'll call it a societal normal type of productivity. There's somebody that has the ability to show up for work, and they might be a workaholic and they've got tons of energy for that kind of output. Maybe they don't have that much energy for their family or for their emotional experiences. And we might quietly criticize that, but we don't publicly criticize that because they're doing a great job at work. Mm-hmm. Right? So those kind of things you can see. If I have this type of energy, I might think that I'm just lazy, or I'm just irresponsible, or insert whatever negative feeling you're having about showing up differently with your energy. So that's one way that it works, we'll say. Now there's 12 different varieties. It's a generalization, I will say, to say that every Cancer Mars would be like that. There are other things that matter. Astrology is very nuanced. So if you look at your chart and you're like, I have Capricorn Mars, but I don't have that, there could be a reason. I would love to explain it to you based on your individual chart, but I can't generalize too specifically, unfortunately. But that's one way that works. The other way is through transits. Now, if somebody has never heard of an astrology transit before, they might wonder, what does that mean? And we'll kind of compare it to astrological weather, right? It's temporary. Sometimes it lasts a long time, though. Sometimes you have a rainstorm that will last an entire week. Sometimes you have a tornado that lasts 3 minutes. So that's kind of how astrology transits work. Sometimes they will be long, sometimes they will be short, sometimes they will be gentle, and sometimes they will be intense. Now, if you have, we'll keep going with the Mars example because that seems to be what people kind of feel kind of crappy about. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have the energy to put into this thing I wish I did.
Yeah.
And so if you're feeling kind of crappy about that, it could be, if it's a chronic problem, we'll say, like me, I don't ever have the energy to do things that aren't really that meaningful. That's a chronic problem because it doesn't go away. It never has gone away. I'm 33, never gone away. Probably not going to go away. So I need to mitigate that with something long term. So short term, though, if I'm just kind of feeling like for the last, 2-3 weeks, I felt a certain way, I can guess that there's something going on in the astrological weather, and that helps me understand better where am I at in a process that's unfolding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So without giving you a dissertation about all the different transits, I would say the way that it works is you either have a chronic problem or an acute problem. And that's pretty much everything, isn't it? Yeah. Pretty much everything in life every problem in life is either long-term or short-term. And so luckily, astrology has ways that we can kind of try to figure out which one is which, and then we can go about having solutions to those problems.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned like the process unfolding, right?
Yeah.
Like, can you dive into that? Just like, more?
That's my favorite thing about astrology, actually. So a really great example of this is the Saturn cycle. Now, I can use the word Saturn cycle to describe two things. Isn't that funny how I keep saying it's two things? Mm-hmm. That's a common thing, apparently. So there's two ways. The shortest cycle, we'll say, for Saturn is through a sign. Okay, so it will enter a sign, go through the process of changing that sign in a Saturnian way. All the planets have different offerings, we'll say. Saturn's offering is structure and boundaries and creating something that will make it last the test of time. Mm-hmm. And so that's its offering. Sometimes that offering looks like taking away things that don't fit into that. And that feels sad or scary or frustrating, right? It's not always easy to have things. It's not always easy to face the fact that this thing doesn't fit in our more sustainable lifestyle. And so that can happen. And that's one part of the Saturn cycle. We can say that a Saturn cycle is a Saturn transit through a sign. That takes 2.5 years, we'll say, about 2.5 to 3 years. So if you are somebody who, let's say, I'm going to use my example just because I have permission to talk about me. So I have right now, Saturn is in the sign Pisces. This year, it will go into the sign Aries. But regardless of when you're reading or when you're listening to this or experiencing this conversation, it doesn't really matter. The principle is still the same. It entered into Pisces in 2023. And for me, individually in my chart, it was entering into a place where I could use that energy for a few things. This is called a house, and that tells me what area of life is most impacted by this planet's offering. So right now, this planet is entering into my third house, which is oftentimes about neighborhoods, siblings, or messaging, foundational education. So those are the themes that are associated with the house. I decided, what would be a really good usage of this? Saturn wants me to build a foundation. So maybe what I should do is make sure that I have all of the educational foundations done for my career. And so instead of just going in, not knowing anything, if I didn't know anything about astrology, if I didn't know what was going on, I would just flounder around and be confused as to why I was getting all these all this constriction and frustration and friction around my lack of understanding something fundamental. Good news, I know astrology. So instead, I took a course. And so it was an easy thing for me to do. Now, before I really knew about astrology and I went through this process that was unfolding, It went through my 11th house, which is about groups and friends and things like that. And that was when I lost all of those friends. And I took it so personally, Shannon. I thought for sure that I was just a piece of crap and I needed to learn how to be a better doormat. And honestly, it was so hard for me to understand because I truly felt like I was a very good friend. I was somebody who was going to give you the world if I had it. And it was so confusing why I was being met with this reduction and this constriction of my friend groups. Well, that process went through and eventually, of course, I moved out of that house and I wasn't so focused on that anymore. The residual problems up here about how terrible of a person I was were remaining, and I had to work through those later. But the actual activity of friend leaving my life was done, thankfully. So that cycle was over. If I knew about Saturn cycles back then, I would have seen, oh, Saturn is going to enter into Scorpio into my 11th house, and I'll know that I'm likely to lose friends. And that would have made it a lot easier when they vacated my life, of course. So that's one way we can look at a process unfolding. We can look at a planet's transgression through a zodiac sign. The other type of cycle is a return cycle. Now, even the average population is aware of a certain type of return cycle, and that's the birthday. We know that the sun moves, if you're born in the springtime, your birthday is coming around if it's springtime again, right? We know that intuitively. That's how we celebrate birthdays. But actually, all the planets do that. And so they all will eventually go from wherever it was when you were born around the zodiac signs in zodiacal order, like Aries, Taurus, Gemini, right? They go in this order until they come back to where they were when you were born. And this is called a return. Now, I love to look at the Saturn return because it's the maturation process. So without, again, going too deeply into the details and how this all works, there are certain checkpoints, we'll say, along Saturn's process around to where it was when you were born. Now, this process takes 30 years. And that's why when we are around 30, we start to feel more like grown-ups. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if you had this experience, but when you turned like 18, 21, you didn't really feel like a grown-up. You were given responsibilities, but you still felt like a teenager for quite a while until one day you woke up and you're like, oh, dang, I got like real responsibilities. You know what I mean? And as you approach 30, it starts to be more cemented. Your foundation starts to be more secure, right? And so that is Saturn's process unfolding. So we'll say between 0 and 7, you're going through it's not easy to be between 0 and 7, but you're going through a pretty gentle maturation process, right? You don't have that many expectations. Most people aren't really expecting that much of a 6-year-old. But when they start to become 7, they start to have a little more responsibility, right? They start to pick out their own clothes. They put their own shoes on. They're expected to make sure that they bring the right papers home from school and that kind of thing. And then when they turn 14, they start to have more responsibility, right? After that, turn 21, even more responsibility. I actually have a really great blog post about this if anybody's interested in all of the different little tiny milestones of the first maturation process. But you can see that's how a Saturn process would unfold. There are certain times where it's a little easier, and there are certain times where it's very hard. And the very hard ones are where the planets are having a conversation in a geometric shape that is harsh. And so 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 90 degrees again, and then back to 0 degrees are the harshest ones. And that's usually when we are forced to figure out what's standing in our way that is not helping us be sustainable, right? To have this more responsible lifestyle. So that is basically how the processes will unfold. And if you are unaware of those processes, it can feel very disorienting. Why am I going through this? What am I doing wrong that I'm having to experience this? And I think one of the best things that somebody could take from this conversation, even if they never look into astrology at all, is that there is some mechanism out there that helps to explain that you're just you're just in the middle of a process, and something being difficult doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. And it doesn't mean that you should quit. That's the biggest thing, I think, that somebody understanding just the concept of a process unfolding, but not actually understanding what the process is, could take away from this.
Mm, so fascinating. Yeah, it's so interesting. Thank you for explaining all that. I think it probably also makes a lot more sense when somebody actually goes in, does it for themselves. They're like, okay, I remember when people first started talking about houses and planet alignment, I literally would like laugh because I was like, okay, whatever. I didn't
I
understand.
think I think my husband still sort of does. He's not into it at all. And every once in a while, I this eyebrow ring I've had for 15 years. And I recently, over the last 3 months, it has been so painful and it's just been bothering me so much. I know it's associated with Mars and in its retrograde cycle. And I told my husband, he's like, when are you just going to deal with that? And I'm like, well, because I know that Mars is going to enter into Leo soon and it'll just be better then. And he's like, whatever.
I don't understand it too, but I do find it fascinating. And I know so many people that, I mean, that's how they, I guess, kind of a question is at what point, let me figure out how to phrase this. A lot of people look at their charts, right? And then start acting as if that chart is about to happen versus like letting your kind of things unfold. So at what point do you just like act because it's this house or blame it almost on this versus also still having control of your life in a different way and not just letting it be because the planets and whatever Earth are all lying a little different. Do you know what I mean?
That's a great question. I think what you're actually, yeah, what you're asking is how do you avoid the trap of a vicious cycle, right? Where you think this is going to happen, so now you've created the problem itself. Yeah. And that's a very fair question. I can't actually tell you that that's not happening. I don't have the proof or anything because astrology is still sort of something that's not really understood. Yeah. I wonder if this is related to the question of, is astrology just confirmation bias? Do you look at your astrology chart and then seek out experiences that would explain what you're seeing in your chart? And I only can tell you that as somebody who has not been an astrologer from birth, right? And I'm not saying that like silly, haha. I'm literally telling you between the ages of being born and I think I was in 2021, I must have been 20, well, I turned 20. So I must have been almost 30, not quite 30, 27 or something. I don't know. Somebody do the math. I was born in 91. I was in my later 20s. And so I started to look into transits and I was like, okay, the reason that this happened was because I quit smoking easily for some reason. I'm not saying it was easy, but it was way more easy when I quit smoking in 2020. And I was like, why was that easy? Because 6 months before that, I tried to quit smoking cigarettes and it was, oh my God, it was so hard, Shannon. And I actually just had no reason to quit quitting. And I picked up a cigarette and I lit it after 1 week of trying to quit. And I was like, why was it so easy in 2020? So then I looked and I started to wonder, what did that have in common with some other times that I quit something easily? So I thought back, and I think it was the year before that I quit drinking Mountain Dew and Mellow Yellow. I'm from the Midwest. We love Mellow Yellow out there. So I was a soda addict from when I was a baby. I don't know if my mom gave me Mountain Dew as a baby, but I grew up on it. I drank it a lot. My husband and I were both soda addicts where we wouldn't have water for months, literally months. And I know for some of your more advanced listeners, that is shocking, but it's the truth for some soda addicts.
Yeah.
And so I looked back and I was like, what was going on when I quit drinking soda? And what was going on when I easily quit smoking cigarettes? And sure enough, there was something very notable happening in my astrology chart. And I had both of those times, I had Venus at the same place it was when I was born. So I was having a Venus return. So I started wondering, well, if it was easy for me to quit those 2 times, then what was going on 6 months ago when I tried to quit, but it was hard for no reason and I just quit quitting? Well, I looked and Venus was in the opposite location of when I was born. So if you think of the full moon, right? The new moon, you can't see the moon because it's with the sun. And so that we'll say that's hidden, right? We'll say that's merged with the sun and they're conjoined and they have the same goals at that point. Whereas with the full moon, they're opposing each other. So now they're staring each other in the face, right? There's nothing hidden anymore. Everything is out in the open, and it's almost this conflict, right? It's like tug of war. And so frustrating, but obvious. Okay. And so that is what Venus was doing when I tried to quit smoking the first time, but had no success for really no reason. So then I realized, okay, well, if that's the case, then what can I use this information for? And I looked, and it turns out that the year that I quit smoking in 2020 was the year that Venus was going to do a retrograde cycle in Gemini. This only happens once every 8 years. It doesn't happen to every sign. It only happens in 5 signs at a time. And so it's actually very rare to say that Venus would be in that location and she would do it 3 times. So I saw at that moment that I had the opportunity to use Venus, we'll say. I like to say I'm using astrology instead of astrology using me. And so I saw that I had the opportunity then to use Venus to do 2 more things that were better for my health. And so I used it to give up drinking another type of beverage. It was essentially Arnold Palmer. I don't know if you've ever had that. Arnold Palmer in a can. I used that to quit drinking Mountain Dew. It was definitely better, but I was truly not, I was only partially through the process of not being addicted to a drink. You know what I'm saying? And so that was the next thing that I did. And then I used it to get off of social media. I completely deleted my Facebook, Instagram. I didn't participate in anything else. And I didn't do that for quite a while until I started this business again. And now I use it significantly more mindfully than I ever used it before. So while I, have tendencies towards addiction with certain things, I used that to heavily mitigate them. And so anyway, the thing I'm really trying to say here is that I didn't know about any of that when it was happening. When I chose to quit, both the time it didn't really work out and the time it did work out, there was a pretty rare astrological occurrence happening that does make sense with my chart. Not everybody can use Venus to quit something addictive because Venus isn't always in a place of the chart that has anything to do with health. If Venus wasn't in the place that she's at in my chart, where she's in the 6th house of health and routines, it wouldn't make sense for me to quit smoking then, because that's a health routine. If she was in my house of making money, well, then it would be about money. It wouldn't be about health. If she was in my house of friendship, well, then it would be about friends. It wouldn't be about health. And so I'm not saying that if I see that a transit is coming, I might not act in accordance to what that transit is meant to represent. But as somebody who wants, I'm not saying I'm not ever subconsciously sabotaged by myself, because we all are. I'm working on that. I think there's some really great book recommendations out there if anybody really wants them. But like, I can give them if anybody wants them. But the thing about creating a life is that I'm going to try my best to create a good one. And so while I might see a scary type of transit that's coming and I might accidentally play into the hand, it's the story of Oedipus. It's the story of Anakin creating, the exact problems that he was trying to avoid in Star Wars. It's possible that that is the story that is playing out. But I still think if I could have saved myself from the heartbreak, I'm not using that word lightly. I was brokenhearted when those friend groups left me. I know I keep referring to that, but that's like my big thing is I literally chose to hate myself for almost a decade because of this friend group. I wouldn't have chosen that. I would have chosen to see it as in, okay, now I know that Saturn is going to come in to my friend group area of my life, remove the friends who are not good for me long-term and sustainably and for my long-term success in life, because that's what he does. And so I don't have to make it personal about how I'm such a crappy person. And so anyway, I'm not sure if I've definitely gone on a tangent, but the point is I can't tell you that it's not confirmation bias or that it's not a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if it is, I'm still trying to do it as best as possible and to give the planet something constructive to work with instead of something destructive, which it can do.
Wow, I feel like there's so much to digest on that, and but like really well explained too. So thank you for kind of breaking it down for us. I think two questions here. If someone wanted to learn more, can you repeat that website and any other websites you think would be a good starting
Oh,
place?
absolutely. And I will send them to you so you can put them in the show notes, and that way
Wonderful.
it'll just be easy for your listeners and our listeners now. And so
Yes.
the best one I love to use is astro.com. That one is very user friendly. It does have a lot of really amazing free options. And in the natal chart tour that I offer, I'm thinking I should probably make just a standalone video on how to, use astro.com easily. There might even be one on YouTube. But my favorite place for beginners to go is the Astro Click Portrait. There is a menu, and it basically says free horoscopes, and then you click on personality, and then you just click on Astro Click Portrait. If you haven't put your birth chart in, though, like you haven't put in your information, it will ask you to do it at that point, so that's easy. But you do have to put in your time of birth to get some of the very nuanced and very personalized information.
Yeah.
Now, if you are somebody like my mom was adopted, and we don't have a birth time for her, there are very advanced astrologers who can go through your life story with you and create a birth time for you that is probably legitimate because they know their craft very well if they're able to provide this. I would not expect this to be an inexpensive service. So if somebody says they're going to do that for you and they're going to do it for like $100, I don't think I would trust them. This process should take probably more than $300. I'm not actually sure. I should look, but I kind of want to get that knowledge myself and do it with my mom. But anyway, that's something that can be done. So don't think that you're out of luck if you are maybe adopted or if there's for some reason no way for you to get your birth information, like your exact birth time to the minute. But that is going to pop up in that instance. If you haven't put it in, it'll say, hey, I don't know who you want me to show you a chart for. Can you give me some information? And then you can put that in. The other thing that I referenced earlier was the short report forecast. I don't know if I did mention that. I was going to. It's just another place that's really unique and interesting on astro.com. And it talks about that kind of quality of time, like I was talking about. So it'll give you sometimes it's up to a year or 18 months of kind of the expected quality of time that's coming up. But before people rush off and do that, I want to be very transparent. Sometimes it will tell you something that you don't want to hear. Yeah. Like when I was 18 and I read it, and it told me that between 2011 and 13, there was going to be a period of extreme crisis. And it was that time where I lost a friend and then I had an identity crisis. It was not, at the time it was like, oh my gosh, haha, that's crazy. I can't believe that, whatever. It was real. It was very real. It was very much a crisis. I literally fantasized about, like, again, not anything like, actually taking actions in that negative way, but like I fantasized about starting a whole new life. That's an identity crisis. That's feeling unsafe to be who you are. That's a crisis. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I just want to make sure I'm not trying to tell you, oh, it's scary, don't go there. I'm saying emotionally prepare yourself for the fact that life is not all easy, and it won't be. And if you want to study astrology, even to a small degree, be aware that the Dunning-Kruger effect is very strong with astrology. And if you don't know what that is, it means that when you don't know very much, you are very confident. And then when you learn just a little bit, you start to see how unconfident you really should be at learning this. And then as you learn more, you start to see that you have the same amount of confidence as you had when you first started, but there is a very sharp drop. And if you want to read more about that, I'm pretty sure that's what the book The Dip is about. I think it's from Seth Godin. I'm sorry if I'm saying that, like, if that's inaccurate, but it's basically about this valley of despair where you just learn a little bit too much and you realize that this is hard. Life is difficult. It's not something that is just like, oh, now I know astrology, so now I'll be immune to all the difficulties. That's not how it works. You will know that there are difficulties coming to a degree. Oftentimes, you will still be blindsided by things because that's the nature of life. And even the significations of some of the planets themselves is unpredictability, just to keep it fresh and exciting, I guess. But if you are going to go into this, be aware that there are more challenges in life than ease. That's just what being alive is. And I challenge you to look at all of the challenge that you see in your chart, in your potential future. And even if you don't look into astrology and you suffer from something like anxiety or, catastrophizing or something like that, just acknowledge that at some point, this is a little morbid, but at some point we all pass away, but you will survive every single thing up until then. And if this is not going to be your death, then you are going to be stronger at the end of it. And I know that when you're going through something really hard, and I'm not trying to trivialize anything, if you're facing cancer or you're facing something like, a loved one is trying to leave you, or you are, trying to, go through financial ruin or anything that feels like this is the end of the world. It's not to trivialize the fact that that's happening. It's just to say that somehow you will survive it if you don't die. And I know that sounds really morbid, but the strength that you get from living through something difficult is unmatched, and I'm not a Marine, but I think that's their logo or something, like their motto, like pain is weakness leaving the body. Like, again, not to sound very privileged, because I know that losing your friends is not anything like, going through a cancer journey or something like that. And the thing is I don't know what's really in store for my life either. But what I do know is I know that everything that the astrology tells me is that it was already going to happen. I was always going to have difficulty with my friend groups in 2011. It doesn't matter if I knew that or didn't, it was going to happen. And so if it's going to happen, now at least I can approach it and understand the context is that I'm not a bad person. I'm getting better friends soon, right? If I'm going to have this, difficulty with my finances where I literally become homeless, I'm going to build the foundation to make sure that I don't have to go through that again, at least for another 30 years. And the likelihood of me not having learned that lesson after 30 years is pretty small. Next time I go through that lesson, I'm probably not going to be homeless. I'm probably just going to, lose a decent chunk of money or something. And at 50, that's a lot different than at, 19 or whatever. And so anyway, I just want to really be transparent and say that learning astrology will not make things automatically easy. You will not become immune to bad things happening to you. You will be able to establish what the context around those challenging things are, and you'll be able to approach it with a way better frame of mind. People are acting under duress and they don't realize it, but astrology helps them understand, okay, if I was to make some kind of pivot or move right now, it would be under duress. And do I really want that? Do I want to take a step back? Because that's what the true value, I think, is. So, not to get on my soapbox or anything, but.
Well, thank you for all that beautiful insight. I think it's important, kind of maybe a little lesser known avenue that people don't talk about as much.
Yeah, the existential dread is important, and I'm obviously passionate about it. Not that I didn't know that, but it is very, it is a very it's not talked about enough, I don't think, that there's this aspect where you may need to take a step back and actually deepen your relationship to faith, whatever that looks like. I don't really care what a person's faith is because it's very personal, but you might have to confront that if you are actually interested in learning about the quality of time, because it will make you understand that you have control over your actions and how you react to things, and that's about it.
True. Shanae, where can people find you if they want to learn more, if they want to get in contact with you? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I have my website. It's currently shanaesmith.com. And of course, I'll give that link over so that way it's easy. But I have a pretty awesome blog, actually. I used some astrology transits this fall and winter to completely revise it. I was very delusional about how long that was going to take. I thought maybe a few weeks. It literally took me 5 months to redo that.
Wow.
So it is top notch now, in my opinion. ChatGPT told me I saved like $20,000 by doing it myself. So hopefully I did a good job. I think I did. So that's really exciting to me. The blog posts are, some of them are beginner friendly, some of them are a little more advanced. And so it's a really great place for people to kind of explore and get to know what astrology can do for them. I actually have a post called "How Can Astrology Help Me?" That's a really great place to start. But otherwise, my services are all in there as well. So people can see I have stuff for beginners. I've got something that's a little more dialogue based and in depth. So if they want to have a consultation with me about their actual moment in time, we can do that, about their, or maybe about their priorities in life. That's something I think is very important, is understanding what are your true priorities and what do you really want out of this life. And so we can talk about that. But otherwise, yeah, just click around. There's a free course available as well. It is a little advanced, but I think if you were not trying to rush yourself and you weren't worried about getting it done in 5 days, you could absolutely get a ton of free value out of that. And it is very in depth. It's all about setting goals that really align with who you are as a person and establishing what those are. So I think it's really great. I'm really proud of it. And yeah, so that's what I've got.
Oh, amazing. I will definitely put those down below in the show notes. So make sure to send me any ones. I know I have your main one. And yes, I want to thank you guys for listening. If you guys found this helpful or you had any like aha little moment, would love to hear about it. I'd love for you guys to write a review or just send me a DM that's like, hey, this was really interesting. But either way, thank you, Shanae, so much for being here. And thank you guys for listening. And we will catch you on the next show.